Hello, and welcome to Flying 118 Motorsports. Thank you very much for joining me today. I have a very special guest, and I'm very excited about. We have the Limerock Park 37th Historic Festival this weekend, and I have the chairman of the festival, Mr. Murray Smith.
Hello.
Murray, thank you.
You're the only person that's called me Mister since I've been here.
I really appreciate taking the time, sir. Thank you so much for joining me in this broadcast. I know you're very busy, and but it's definitely much appreciated. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, one thing I want to address is there may be some people here who join us and view this at some point in time and say, okay, Murray Smith looks like a cool guy, but who is Murray Smith? So I hope you don't mind if I take 10 seconds to read straight off the Road Racing Drivers Club a little blurb about you. Murray is a well-known competitor in all forms of motorsports in a wide variety of vehicles, but perhaps less recognized for his management experience in the field. He is past chairman of BMP, the organization which runs the four major British championships, Formula 3, British Touring Cars, GT, and Superbikes, and he is also a past member of the FIA Formula One Management Commission. Smith was the founder of the extraordinary Louis Vuitton Classic at Rockefeller Center, and also the instigator and organizer of the Legends Historic Racing event at Mount Tremblant in Quebec. He was also the first to recognize the commercial potential of historic and classic car events and has been successfully involved with sponsorship development at Goodwood, Nürburgring, Monterey, Silverstone, Monaco, and with Barrett-Jackson in Scottsdale. So basically, sir, this is not your first rodeo.
No, that all sounds very impressive.
Sir, with that resume, I guess my very first question to you is, how special is it to be running an event like this at a historic track like Limerock?
Well, it's terrific. I mean, I've been doing this for quite a few years now. I don't know exactly how many 10 or 11, something like that.
Right.
And I'm a guy who likes to be in charge of something. And so while I enjoy the racing side of it, I've always been very enthusiastic about getting people involved and running events that people said were not possible. The Louis Vuitton Classic in Rockefeller Center is a typical example. And we closed down Fifth Avenue and ran Formula One cars down there on Sunday. So that was quite something.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. For a festival like this, and obviously you have a lot of owners of cars and you have a lot of fans, who do you feel is enjoying the event more? The fans or the participants, the guys who are bringing the cars?
Well, I think obviously the people who are doing it
Right.
probably enjoy it a great deal. But it's difficult to quantify exactly how much the fans like it as opposed to the owners. I know that a lot of people here love to race. And at the same time, I know a lot of people like to watch racing. I mean, I've been involved on both sides of the fence. And it's difficult to say, well, did you enjoy your last race more than running an event? It's a different kind of pleasure. It's a different kind of achievement. Sometimes in racing you do all right and sometimes you don't. But it's good to enjoy it. With an event, it depends on the reactions of the public as much as anything else. And we try to put forward at Limerock a real combination of historic cars. I mean, by historic, I mean in American terms. So pre-war cars, later cars, groups of cars, everything from Formula Atlantic to pre-war, pre-1939 cars. So it's a real mixture, attracting the cars to come, making sure that people behave themselves sufficiently without stultifying their performance. That makes it good for the public too.
Yeah. Have you seen a trend in recent years? This is the 37th year of the historic festival. And have you seen a trend with certain marks of cars becoming more available for the historic event, or less, or more cars from a certain era becoming available, or maybe less cars of a certain? Do you see a pattern?
Well, we don't have in America, at least on the center and the East Coast, so many pre-war cars.
Okay.
You know, Grand Prix cars of the 30s, for instance. But we do have a pretty mixed bag in the pre-war race. Um, we have no trouble raising full grids for sports cars and
Right.
formula cars of the post-war era up until about 1980, say. And this year we've instituted a Miata race, because I think those cars are great, and I think they're going to be historic cars in the future. They're the things that the Sprite and the MG Midget should have become, and
Right.
they're wonderful little cars. And some of them now are 30 years old. Well, that's almost historic by American standards.
Right. Very good. Obviously, with these events and the owners bringing these cars, and as years go by, you want to keep seeing these cars year after year. You don't want them to disappear. Do you feel that the passion and appreciation for the cars that are present at this festival is being passed on from one generation to the next? Do you see that among the families and among the people that are participating?
Yeah, I mean, I think that not all fathers pass on their enthusiasm to their sons, but there is quite a lot of it here. But I think it's really people become aware of the cars that they loved when they were younger, Lotus 23s and things like that, which are fantastically fast sports cars. And we have quite a few of that sort of car, Lotus 23s, Elva Mark 7s, etc.
Right.
Obviously, I don't want to see a group here like the really quick groups that you can run at Sebring or Daytona, because the circuit is a mile and a half. It's very demanding and it's super fast.
Right.
Even IMSA doesn't run P1 cars here. They don't run prototypes. They run the GT cars and they put on a great show.
Yep.
And no doubt one day we'll have that sort of car running. I don't think we could ever run a historic race here with 956s and 962 Porsches, etc.
Right.
The track is too demanding, and a lot of the drivers are not really up to driving those cars at terrific speed with people all around them in such a confined area.
For some of the, like you just mentioned, for some of those drivers that do participate on track and racing on track,
Yes.
for those drivers that maybe it's their first experience at Lime Rock at this festival, what do you hear in the feedback as maybe something that's surprised them about the track?
Well, I think a lot of people who've never been here, there's going to be two brothers driving pretty good cars here this weekend who've never been here. And I'll be interested to talk to them after their first experience. It's very demanding. It's people said, well, it's only a mile and a half and it hasn't got that many corners, but the corners are all demanding, with the exception of two. There's three maybe. You don't really have to brake if you're going fast. So speeds are high, and of course they're in close proximity to each other, and not all the drivers are Sterling Moss. But you know, we've got mostly experienced guys. They've all got licenses to drive racing cars, and we also brief them fairly thoroughly on the kind of standards that we expect.
Yeah.
If someone rolls his Elva Mark 7, we anticipate that he didn't do it on purpose, so we tend to say, well, that's it for the weekend.
Yeah.
In other words, we do have fairly strict standards. We have observers, experienced observers around the track watching to see if people are maybe driving over their heads, taking risks that they don't need, nerfing other cars, and we call them in and have a serious talk with them.
Right.
If they crash, if they have serious contact with another car or with the scenery, or they cause an accident, then we ask them to go home for the weekend. Since they all know that and they don't want to go home, and they don't want the sort of ridicule factor them being sent home, most of them behave themselves, and they know very well the standards that we impose.
Very good. Obviously, you have a lot of cars there, both on the track, and I believe there's 800 cars registered for the show on Sunday, correct?
Well, what happens is that we are the only racetrack in America that has full-on racing on Saturday and Monday, and a full-on concourse, a concours d'elegance on Sunday. The
Right.
concourse is by invitation only, and that's 225 cars. And then we have a thing called the Gathering of the Marks, and that fills the whole track uh, with a bunch of enthusiasts. You could have the BMW TII group, and they come along and bring 40 cars. We have the
Right.
Mercedes 300 SL group, the Citroën de Chevaux group. So we have a great many cars around the track, and they just love to come and sit on the track. We have beverages out there, non-alcoholic, of course, although they can drink beer if they're not racing. And it's a great show. And the
Yeah.
concourse, this year we've got the features in the concourse this year are Italian masterpieces and Morgans. Well, we've got 46 Morgans coming,
Wow.
everything from 1938 till sort of relatively late 70s cars. And
Wow.
then in the Italian masterpieces, we've got probably the best gathering of Ferrari competition cars, Maserati competition cars, Alfa competition cars that you'll ever see, except perhaps at Pebble Beach.
Yeah. Incredible. And with the amount of cars and people attending this, tell me a little bit about the precautions that the owners have to take and the logistics necessary in order to get the cars to Lime Rock from where these people are coming from. I know you have some people from the Northeast, but I know there's also people from great distances coming. Tell us a little bit about the precautions and the logistics involved in getting the car there.
Well, there are. Let's take an example. We have a guy who is sending an Alfa Romeo Monza from 1933, a two-seater racing car of the period, and he's also sending his Ferrari 275 convertible, which has got 17,000 miles on it.
Oh my
So
goodness.
the people who transport those cars for the owners are extremely careful, and the owners don't allow them to come in somebody else's truck. We have two GTOs, two 250 Testarossas, a P2, Alphas all the way from Alfa Monzas of the 30s to the TZ cars of the late era, and there's a TZ1 and a TZ2 coming, as well as the Monzas and an 8C35 Grand Prix car. We have Maseratis of all descriptions, including a sort of Frua special and 250F, which you don't see very often in this country. So, I mean, it's a terrific show. It's a
Yeah.
thing I'm looking forward to it very much.
Yeah. A high percentage of the cars that attend the festival have a racing heritage. And the people in attendance that are around these cars that would otherwise be probably not out in the open, they'd be garaged or babied or wherever they might be. Do you feel that there's enough appreciation among the people who attend for the stories and the lineage and the heritage of the cars, in addition to them just appreciating the physical condition of these cars?
No, I think, the concourse, people tend to be very shiny, but that's not the way with competition cars. The owners who own the great cars, for instance, the two GTOs we've got coming, the one thing we don't want is someone, throwing a brick at them, but most of the people who are attending have tremendous respect for the cars, not just for their shininess, but for the heritage, as you mentioned. I
Yeah.
mean, when we had Sterling Moss here, he was absolutely mobbed. We've had Jochen Mass, we've had Sterling Moss, we've had John, God, I can't remember his name, John Morton. John Morton and Pete Brock came a couple of years ago. So the people can get close to them and they can touch the cars. We'd rather they didn't, but they can actually look inside the cockpits. There are no railings here. It's not, and I must say I was at Pebble this year and they weren't railed in either. I think these cars now are more than just old racing cars. They're objets d'art, they're art objects.
Yes.
They're they're the Manets and Picassos of the racing car world. I mean, when you, as I hope, see three Monza Alphas, an 8C35 like the car that Nuvolari drove, people are, they're, I think they're a little breathless when they see them. It should
Yeah.
be an extraordinary show.
Yeah. Having these cars running around on a track reminds us of a time when the driver inputs were at a maximum and obviously very minimal electronic assistance in the cars and so on. Can we still extract and maybe apply things learned from the historic era and apply it to the modern era due to the sort of the purity of how racing was? Meaning,
Well,
for example, just to give you a quick example, like, with the integration of hybrid technology into racing series, you start to see things like push to pass and so on, right? But are we kind of getting away from some of the purity of racing?
well, racing's still pure. I mean, Formula One, however electronic it may be, and however driven it is by downforce and the reactions of the cars in the wake, aerodynamic wake of cars in front, that's still very demanding. Obviously, it takes a different kind of skill to drive a Morgan plus four. It's more basic, but it still requires someone who goes really quick in a Morgan or an Austin Healey or a Lotus 23 as they evolve require considerable skills. The skills are different. I mean, I drove 956 Porsches, which are ground effect cars, and at first I was amazed by the fact that you could go through corners like over at Mid-Ohio flat, which you can't do in an earlier car because they slide around more. You're sucked down onto the track. But I think someone like Sterling, for instance, could drive anything. Could drive anything today too. I think Lewis Hamilton, people like that, could drive the older cars. The skills required are more organic, if you like, but they're skills that, they're an appreciation of your physical space, which is the same in an old car as it is in a new car. It just demands quicker reactions with ground effects. But, the amount of input you can give to the mechanics, assuming that the car is adjustable, which some of the pre-war cars aren't very much, is it's an appreciation of what the car's doing around you. You have to be more aware in the early cars of oversteer, understeer, but the same applies even in the modern era of racing.
Right. So
Drivers
it sounds
yeah.
it's not. I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Go on, no, you go.
Oh, so it sounds like you're very embracing of the hybrid technology and where racing in general is going as far as like Formula E, hybrid power plants. You embrace that with open arms. It sounds like.
Yeah, we don't embrace it here for the
Right.
simple reason that these are historic cars. So I don't have any cars running that are really later than 1980. And
Right.
there's been a lot of development since then.
Right.
I remember we had the first of the big Porsche extravaganzas here a long time ago, and some guys brought 956s and the latest development of Porsches. But, a racing driver, and read the book by Dennis Jenkinson, The Racing Driver, gives a pretty good idea of what it takes physically for a racing driver to be quick. I mean, Jenkinson was the guy who rode with Moss on the 55 Mille, and he was also a world champion motorcycle sidecar rider. But he got it right. I mean, he said, you need a terrific balance. Your inner ear is very important in your talent to drive a racing car, other than the usual things that we all know about, eyesight, reactions, etc. In older cars, the things happen a little slower, but they still happen very quickly. I mean, there's a great deal of difference between driving a 20s racing car, like a Bentley or something like that, and even a 30s car. And as you graduate to the 250Fs and the Ferrari front engine racing cars, the Van Walls, they're very different again. So I think a racing driver, a good racing driver, is a racing driver, and and it requires different skills to drive different cars, and so I think it's a valid question, but I think that a really good racing driver can drive anything.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have to
Excellent.
learn the technology, and if they're going to drive really fast modern cars, they got to learn. You know, it's you don't dive into that.
I appreciate you taking the time to really detail that answer out, because in online discussion groups and forums and so on, there is a lot of kind of back and forth and opinions being tossed around. But I definitely respect everything you just said, and you give a really good, solid view on it. I appreciate you taking the time to answer that one. Here's a curveball for you. What cars from today, from the current era, will enthusiasts be enjoying at a historic festival 30, 40, 50 years from now?
I think it will be very. I think the basics will be the same, because the important thing about a historic car is that it be historic. I would much rather have a 1965 Porsche 911 with provenance that ran at Daytona or Sebring, etc., in period, and is still maintained the same way it was today as it was then. I think historic cars like the current Chevrolet Corvettes in IMSA will one day be a revered car. I
The
think
C7R?
yeah, I think the Ford GTs will be a revered car. Just as you go back and you take 917 Porsches, you know, which were difficult to drive then and they're still difficult to drive now, are going to be revered. About 5 or 6 years ago, we had a Mercedes W154 here, which was a 1939 Grand Prix car, 4.5 litre, best part of 500 horsepower, skinny, stony tires. And I did 4 or 5 demonstrations here with that car, which was a real privilege to drive, believe it or not. It had only been raced in 1939 by people like von Brauchitsch and guys like that, Dick Seaman. So if you love cars and you love racing cars, that's going to be, you know, and I think the current cars of today are more demanding. So it's going to be difficult to run historic races with current Formula One cars, because you're going to have a whole team to run them. The electronics are more complicated, etc. In fact, on most of the pre-war historic, well, not pre-war, but the historic cars of the 60s and 70s, you don't have those problems. So it'll be a question of adjustment. I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known how to run a computer. Now it's part of my life. And I think the kids of this, the 2060s, the 2050s, will be equally excited to see the old cars running and the later cars. I think that, you know, an enthusiast is an enthusiast. A knowledgeable enthusiast is better than an unknowledgeable one who just sits and says, "Oh, that's a fancy car. I like the color." That's not the same.
Right.
I think, you know, the current Porsche GT, you know, GT3s and stuff like that will be wonderful to run. We've got a lot of RSs here. I've got one group, and I've got the privilege or the handicap of organizing the groups. Well, we've got about 9 or 10 Porsche 911s from the Carrera, you know, era up until about 1978, and those are fantastic cars. But I wanted to run them against something other than the Trans Am cars, so I've got them running with the historic racing cars, sports racing cars of the 60s. I mean, I think a really well-driven Lotus 23 round here will give some of those Porsches a run for their money.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how the contrast.
Yeah. Murray, I know
Making sense to you?
I'm sorry, what?
Am I making sense to you?
Of course.
Good.
Sir, I know it's going to be an extremely busy weekend, and I know you're going to be busy just in managing the event. But And maybe you have a few spare minutes here and there. Where would someone find Murray Smith during this event? If you could sneak away, what do you? Is there one car maybe during a concourse, a couple cars that are on your radar you want to go check out, or one of
Well,
the races that you're going to go sneak away and watch?
I'll watch them all because I'll be in the control tower. We have a full,
Right,
we have a full group of SCCA stewards, and obviously I'm on the radio with them
right,
because if you're running an event like this, I think more than anything else, if you're a responsible person, which I think I am, the one thing I don't want to see is anybody get hurt. I
right.
mean, I've seen people get hurt in racing, and it's very unpleasant. It's a dangerous pastime. It's not like fishing, unless you're fishing for sharks. Um, so I think, I'll be watching very carefully and nervous that everybody gets through the weekend with no trouble. I will also be out at the concourse listening to people's reactions to the Italian masterpieces that we've
Yeah,
got and to the fact that we've got Morgans from 1938 until almost current, but including the Le Mans class winner from 1962, etc. So I shall be there watching and listening and answering questions most of the time. When the racing is on, I tend to keep a close eye on the tower and listening on my radio to what's going on the track because, it's the racing. If it's not Formula One standards, it's
right.
still pretty. It's still pretty intense for those who are doing it.
Yeah, I could definitely appreciate that answer. I'm not going to let you off the hook though,
It's all
because
right.
there's got to be that one car or two cars in the concourse that you saw register and you said, "Oh boy, I can't wait to get my eyes on that."
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because there are cars in the Concourse of all types.
Yeah,
Obviously, I've spent a lot of time talking to people to get the Italian masterpieces here.
right,
I'm very happy that, for instance, the Alfa Romeos, we've got everything from 1920s up until through the Grand Prix era of 1930s until the little Alphas Zagato of the 60s, including we've got an Alfa Zagato non-tubolare, and then we've got a TZ1 and a TZ2 all together. I think the TZ2 is one of my favorite cars. It's the baby GTO, if you like. It's going to be exciting to see them all on the track together. The GTOs, I was very careful. I got one with a standard body of the GTO and then another one with a Fantuzzi body. So you see both eras of the great 250, of the great GTOs.
right.
The 250 TRs is a fantastic mixture. We've got a P1, we've got a 250 LM. We, I think people are going to be dazzled by the what's the word? The scope of the variety that's there. I mean, Ferrari is a great make. Alfa Romeo is a great make. Maserati is a great make. We've got Sterling Moss's 250F here,
Wow,
which won the Italian Grand Prix at an average speed at Monza of 135 miles an hour in 1956, when
wow,
his fastest lap was 136, which
wow.
shows just how hard he was driving. So a few years ago, we had 722, the Mille Miglia car that he won the Mille Miglia with in 1955, which to my mind was the best one-day drive ever in the history of motorsport. So, we're into the history, but we're also taking note of the fact that things like Mazda Miatas, the oldest of which is 30 years old, are going to be the historic cars of the future. And
Right.
they're more manageable, easier to drive, and we've got 27 of them, which should be quite interesting to watch.
That's great. Murray, before we close out, I was hoping for all the viewers who watch this, can you give us a breakdown of the itinerary for the event?
Yeah, today is load-in day, and we have relatively moderate-sized paddocks here, so it's a real squeeze. We've got everything with a guy with a Morgan with one trailer behind a van or his personal car, up to 18-wheelers full of really historic cars. So load-in is a difficult day for the staff and for me because they eventually come to me if there's a problem. But
Right,
most of the time we've got it pretty organized now.
right,
Tomorrow we have, and then we have the tour tonight where 100 vintage and historic cars of one kind or another go on a tour, 17-mile drive through the lovely countryside of this area. And I should point out the countryside here is beautiful, as is the track. And they go off and they end up in Falls Village, and they have a nice street fair and a car show there. Tomorrow in the morning we have qualifying and practice. Same
Tomorrow being Friday.
Yeah, we
For
have
the viewers, yeah.
qualifying and practice. We have 9 groups, so that's quite busy. Saturday we have racing from the same 9 groups, and
Right.
Sunday we have the concourse, which is all day, starting from 9 o'clock in the morning when we load in some of the cars that you don't want to see scratched,
Right.
and then we have racing again on Monday. So it's a busy time for all of us, and I think most people enjoy it.
Yeah. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I plan on attending the event. I look forward to meeting you in person. We're going to wrap up. I got to let you go. I know you got a lot on your plate, but thank you very, very much for taking the time and speaking with me. And I know the viewers are going to appreciate it also. And hopefully we can entice some of the viewers to even attend this event here. But thank you, sir, very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, and I hope lots of people come, because if they're enthusiasts, they'll be thrilled. And if they're just people who come in because of this broadcast, for instance, who don't know all that much about cars, they're going to be amazed by the stuff here.
I'm sure they will. I can guarantee it. Thank you, sir. Thank you again. I wish you the best, and I hope you have a great event.
I look forward to meeting you.
Same here. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.